Hi, and welcome to our Farmer to Farmer panel as part of a larger Western SARE grant, which aims to look at soil health from the unique perspective of soils in the West. We know that in the world of agriculture education, and especially that of diversified growing, the power of narrative and experiential learning for new farmers has been demonstrated to be incredibly effective in the transfer of knowledge and skills. I'm Amy Kusch, and I'm here working with the Women Food and Agriculture Network to help facilitate a conversation between women and non-binary farmers in the West who are managing the particular nuances of Western soils with intention, love, science, and care. Joining us today, we have Josie Hart, who is the Associate Director of Farm Programs for the Denver Botanic Gardens. Josie has been farming for 10 years and has grown everything from flowers to herbs to medicinal plants. Chatfield Farms is a 7-acre organic PSA farm that serves 350 shareholders weekly and is a sister site to Denver Botanic Gardens in downtown Denver. They donate a large portion of their produce to community partners that address food security. They also focus on native plants, cover crops, compost production, education for veterans, restoration work, and ecosystem services. Welcome, Josie. We also have with us today Emma Leitz-Bilecki, and Emma is the Farm to School Director at Guidestone, Colorado. Emma manages Guidestone's 4-acre community and school farm in Salida, which provides food to public schools and Salida's hospital. Guidestone's Farm to School program provides educational opportunities for youth and adults of all ages across several growing spaces, including 1 farm, 5 school and community gardens, and a working ranch. We are so happy Emma's here to join the conversation today. We have with us Jade Sado, grower and owner at Minoru Farm in Brighton, Colorado. Jade is the farmer grower of Minoru Farm. The farm is 4 acres and focuses on growing Asian varieties of vegetables to support the local Asian diaspora. We asked panelists to consider the unique geographic location and environmental considerations for audience members who might not be familiar with the arid West. We also asked panelists to tell us how do they manage for healthy water dynamics in the field, as drought is always an issue for growing in the West. And we wanted to find out how drought has impacted our growers today. In line with that, we also hope to explore how our growers utilize cover crops or other tactics to build organic matter. And so with that, we'll jump to Jade. Jade, is that okay if we jump to you?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. I know we have Josie there in the beginning. To talk, a little bit about how you have approached growing in what is sometimes a tough environment here in Colorado.
Yeah, so I guess a little bit about the farm is that I'm on historically like alfalfa pasture land for horses that was then turned into a tree farm that then was purchased by the city and put under conservation for agricultural purposes. And it's not defined in any way. It's kind of broad. It's broadly defined by the city. And so the field that I have was it was fallow for a number of years before I got to it, but it has all the signs of being exhausted. The soil is really tired and it hasn't been replenished or really managed in a way where it can maintain a level of consistent fertility. And that coincides with the drought a bit, because a lot of the water that I currently have access to was also used to heavily water other portions of the field over the course of the last 10 years. So whether or not it has seen enough water to like keep sub levels like hydrated enough has also been an issue, because when I first got to it, there were huge cracks in the field. So that's been an interesting thing to battle with drought.
Do you find that any sort of either cover crops, whether they're used as cover crops or do double duty as maybe food or herb crops that you grow, help you with water infiltration?
So I do a number of things. I use wood chips in the pathways. We try to use leaves and compost and cover crop in each bed, but we also have a permanent bed structure because we have had the desire to do no-till. But as the years have gone on, we've realized that some of the beds are kind of like cement. And so we needed a little bit of agitation from walk behind tractors to kind of assist in just like bluffing it up a little bit. And we kind of also realized that we are building an entirely new surface to the soil, because it seems like what I do have is just like bare natural, like kind of what you would consider to be like the bottom soil layer. So we have had to like start building it back up again. And we do use a lot of cover crop.
I'm curious, do you all irrigate, and do you use drip, overhead, or a combination of both?
We do, I'd say 90% drip tape, because that is the system that we're set up for. But I have MacGyvered together a type of sprinkler system that does help, just kind of in the greenhouses and stuff, like, because not greenhouses, but caterpillar tunnels in the field, I feel like I need the sprinkler system to help wash away salts and buildup that can occur on those beds. So I am trying to figure out how to put that in the field more too, because I do really like the sprinkler efficiency and what it can do for the germination process in the field.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like there's no substitute really for overhead or natural rainfall when you're trying to germinate direct seeded crops, for sure. Are you growing right now, or where are you at in your growing season?
Yeah, I try to grow 50 weeks out of the year. So right now we are on week 5 of our 10-week winter CSA. And it'll end the first week of February. We skip a couple weeks for holidays and stuff, but the plants generally slow down production about now and then pick up again like mid-March.
Yeah, so do you have winter greens, or what have you been pulling, weeks prior to this?
Yeah, it's mostly greens focused. We did finish harvesting all of our carrots and leeks and radicchio from the field, but now everything in the field is like pak choy, and we're having fun with radicchio and escarole, and I'm experimenting with Napa cabbage right now too, so that should be fun.
Awesome. And then as you look towards 2024, backing up, will you apply any specific applications of compost or other mulch or bioamendments to carry you through the winter on beds that aren't active?
So kind of from, I would say like mid-August, every single bed that is done with production for the season, I have put cover crop in. And then that's going to just sit there over winter. And then in the spring, we're going to just toss mulch on top of that. And then I'll lightly till, and it's the harrow till, it's the one that goes like this instead of the turning. I'll use that to kind of just agitate the beds a bit and just reshape them a little bit. But I want to see what that will do for the soil before I try to, for the first time ever, get a soil test next year and have a more specific game plan of what to add.
Yeah, and I'm curious, for folks who will be watching this in the future at some point in time who might be new to establishing cover crops, can you describe for them how you direct seed them or broadcast, and maybe some of your favorite varieties?
Yeah. So my favorite combination, at least for where I am located and the type of soil that I have, I really like to use oats, peas, vetch, and what's the other one? Buckwheat, because they all winter kill pretty easily. The rye up here tends to turn into a weed and it stops other plants from growing. So I've kind of stopped using that in areas where I need there to be production. I do like to use clover in between the beds, although clover really loves our soil out here, so it tends to turn into a weed also. And then the way I approach it is whenever I have a bed that is done for the season, I will mow that crop in, which is like one of my favorite things to do. I just love mowing it. And then I will just sprinkle the seeds on top of that. And then I will use the power harrow and just like kind of scrape the seeds back into the soil and then just water it a ton until it germinates. And then I stop watering it after that and just let it go.
Great, thank you. I love the combination that you named as well, especially oats for days. Thanks so much, Jade, for giving us a little snap, into that aspect. I feel like folks near you are lucky to have access to your fresh greens right now, for sure. And I think, we could hand it over to Josie Hart. And for folks who are watching, I'll just briefly run over the first prompt again, which is asking folks to describe some of the unique environmental considerations of their growing location, but also how growers are managing for water dynamics in our drought-ridden West, and also diving a little bit into how they might utilize cover crops or other tactics to build organic matter. So I'm super stoked to hear Josie share.
Thanks, Amy. So we have been farming here at this location for 13 years with the food production. And we are about 6,000 feet at elevation. So we have a pretty extreme shortened season here. We can get snow oftentimes in May, and we also can get snow in September. So that's super fun when all of your crops are booming and peaking in September. So the cold, and we also are in a large lowland depression. So we have a lot of kind of residual moisture in the mornings, but it also really creates this kind of like cooler atmosphere here in the shoulder seasons. And so we just really have to use a ton of frost cloth, and we have to be very vigilant and really be careful about not putting our crops out too early in the season. We kind of started out like, let's just put everything out. The tomatoes can do it. They'll get snowed on, but then they'll bounce back. No biggie. And let's just roll with it. And then we've really started saying that's a lot of work. And covering everything with 2 layers of fabric and sandbagging everything is exhausting to your body. And do we need to do that? Or should we just kind of wait until the 3rd week of May and chill out a little bit? So that is our unique location. It's really just, we get a lot of frost and we get a lot of swings in temperature. And so the other thing about our location is that we have kind of 2 sides to our farm, and we have one side that used to be this ancient giant river, and it is the most beautiful sandy loam soil. It also comes with like a plethora of beautiful river rocks. That's super fun when you're trying to harrow or till or even broad fork. You're just always harvesting rocks. So that's really like exciting. But also it's beautiful soil. It's really great to grow in. It's really gorgeous. And it came with a pretty high organic level of about 3% for not being tended or taken care of, so I think that that's a little bit on the higher end for soils that have been fallow. And then on the other side of our farm, which is even closer to the hogback, it is bentonite clay. So you can literally take our soil and like form vases and bowls with it and put it on your face as a gorgeous mask. And it's really hard with that type of soil to say, hey, like we're going to go the no-till route. But of course, as the years have progressed, we have tried to be no-till farmers. I would say when I started out in 2014, I wasn't farming full-time. I was doing a lot of the community and volunteer building and was just kind of like on harvest crew and transplant crew. And then at that point, we were really like, we want to grow sustainably. So we don't want to use a lot of chemicals. We don't want to, treat our crops in any kind of like a chemical way. We want to follow the organic practices. And then as we progressed through, we really started focusing more on like, hey, wait a minute. We're not really talking about our soil in this context. We're talking about, chemical use or, so the seed sourcing that we were using and making sure that was organic. And we started focusing more and more every year on soil health and what are our practices that are really affecting the way that we grow our crops. And so we looked at how much we were tilling, and we have 7 acres in active production. So we were definitely burning through with our tiller to shape beds and to mow our crops and to do all of those things, to use the cultivator a lot. And we would even use a shank to rip just to kind of break up that clay. And as we were doing that, we definitely started to realize like, wow, our weed pressure is getting worse every single year. Like, why is this? Are we using too much nitrogen? Are we throwing down too much nitrogen? Are we essentially like pruning and cutting back the thistle, making it stronger and wanting to grow more by these practices that we do with our tractor? And I think the answer to that was definitely yes. We realized that we were increasing our weed pressure so much by tilling and by, breaking up the ground excessively, but we felt like, wow, we have to, because the clay is just so compacted. And the soil before we started growing was kind of like a mixed story, like Jade was sharing. We were growing some pumpkins for a fundraiser, so like conventional pumpkin patch. Before that, it was a lot of alfalfa grazing. Before that, there were pecking ducks, like one of the biggest pecking duck farms this side of the Mississippi here at Chatfield. So it's been, many different uses and long periods of just being fallow and being driven across by tractors and equipment and just kind of even used as a parking lot, I think, at one point in its history. So, we had some significant compaction and just texture issues with our soil on the far side of our farm. And so that's been a really big ongoing challenge and like growth experience with trying to not till all the time, but if you don't, maybe you can't move the soil to even transplant your little tiny plants. So that's kind of the history and like the unique demographic of our farm and where it's located, and kind of our management style has grown more and more every year to be just focus more on the soil and less on, I think, worrying about those external factors that you can't control. Like I said, like the weather or the swings in temperature, you know, that's not something that we can necessarily change, but we can change how healthy our plants are. And that really starts with how resilient and strong our soil food web is. So that's kind of what we've been, you know, that's our journey.
Thanks, Josie. That is like such a fascinating, diverse landscape just within the farm.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
that
it's
clay,
700 acres, so it's really like vast, and there's a lot of like kind of mini ecosystems and microclimates and smaller factors going into how you have to manage all of the soil. So yeah, lots of diversity there.
a lot. Um, and I feel like something that I hear over and over again from farmers all over the West is that challenge of tillage, low tillage, and weed pressure, you know, combined with, but I do need to get, you know, a bed prepped to germinate perhaps direct seeded carrots or radishes. And just, yeah, it's like a cycle of never ending opportunity for troubleshooting, for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I wonder,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, please go.
I was just gonna say, we call ourselves at this iteration low till, because we know we have to till, and we know we use the power harrow as much as possible. We have like a tractor mounted one that's fairly big, and then we have a BCS one. And I think the flail mowers that we use in coordination with the power harrow can really like get us through most of the season. And then I would say the tilling has to come for the bed prep in the beginning of the season with the clay, because it doesn't really matter in Colorado. Like when I first started learning about cover crops, I would see these vast fields of like giant turnip leaves and like sorghum Sudan grass, and like it looked like a jungle, and it was like, okay, like that's what we're gonna do. And then in Colorado with these soils and with our arid climate, like we threw out all of this expensive cover crop seed at the right time, we thought, to catch the moisture, and then it didn't rain, and then we had all this expensive seed sitting there, and we're like, well, I guess we have to harrow it in because it's just sitting on the top. So then we harrowed it, and then but the rain didn't come again, and so you know we didn't get that cover crop for that year. And then the spring rolled around, and we had kind of this odd, like the carryover of that crop that we seeded. So it wasn't all the species, but it was part of the species. And they came back, and it was like this really weird cover crop mix. And then we were like, oh, okay, like this is what dormant seeding is. And this is what seeding is in Colorado, where you lay it down and you wait for the snowpack, and then you can get a crop in the spring. And so I think in the beginning, I thought I was going to have this like lush cover crop, like expanse of, you know, fields upon fields. And what I had to realize is that cover cropping in Colorado, with how short our season is really difficult to do a spring crop, you know, middle of the season vegetable crop, and then a fall shoulder crop of cover crop as well. And so you're using a lot of water, and you're spending a lot of money on seed and vegetables. And then you're also having to grow your vegetables in the middle of that. And so when we started really trying to go full force with, you know, no-till and cover cropping, I noticed that like most of the people in the room at conferences and educational seminars and things like that were not doing small scale mixed vegetables. They just weren't. They're talking about cover cropping on a grand scale with like huge emitters of overhead water, and they're only getting two crops out of their entire year. They're maybe getting like a cash crop of like corn or wheat or something like that, and then a cover crop. And so I think it's just really easy to drink the Kool-Aid, and it's really easy to like tell yourself that you're gonna like get a vegetable crop and 2 full cover crops out of your season, and it's gonna be pretty easy and it's gonna be lush and beautiful. And I think that's not really everyone's reality here in Colorado. And if you're doing that, like I have a full team of farmers. I have 2 head growers that are here year round, plus myself and a soil health technician. And we're all trying to cover crop and like, watering in the cover crop and dialing in the seed mixes and things. And that's like a lot of resources going toward cover cropping because we know it works and it's great. But someone like Jade on Jade's farm, I can't imagine how much time and effort that must try to be to get a cover crop in between your vegetables as well. I think it's a lot. And I think it's safe to say like cover crop as much as you can and focus on soil health as much as you can, but also it's really hard and there's a lot of resources that go into it.
Yeah, Josie, I think that's a great takeaway for any folks watching this who are new growers and new to the West specifically, especially Colorado, to just take a keen eye, to your operation and strategy and return of investment, because what works on the east of the Mississippi, often it's a lot different here. And that's such a great anecdote. Thank you. I wonder what Emma is in Salida, Colorado, so further south from Jade and Josie. Emma, what's your experience in your very unique geographic location here in Colorado with water dynamics, cover crops, building organic matter, and other, particularities you run into?
Yeah, so thanks. Amy, I know you've been to the farm, so you know how unique it is. I guess just to start, I'll say we grow at about 7,000 feet as the elevation here in Salida. And we've always said we have 100 frost-free days per year. We struggle with variable and extreme temperatures, those September snowfalls, and wind. It's really windy. So we lose farmers around us, actually more so because we're kind of in this depression, and I'll talk about that in a sec. But farmers around us really struggle to keep their plastic on their tunnels. I was just pulling up the updated plant hardiness zone map, and it looks like they're saying Salida is right on the border of 5B and 6A. But because there's, interesting topography around here, there's tons of different microclimates. So there's really no saying where we're at. We're kind of in this valley. We can kind of trace a direct line from the mountains, like straight through the heart of Salida. And we're in this historically really wet area, actually. And so the snow melt kind of follows. We have both irrigation ditches and drainage ditches that we border. And the unique situation that creates for us is that in the spring, we actually get subsurface irrigation from snow melt and runoff. So the old timers in Salida say that like this area always flooded. And we can see that that's the case in the ranchland that borders us. But with the increased development around us, that has been exacerbated because of the runoff from impervious surfaces. And so I think when Amy was here, it was pretty wet, right, Amy? We were still drying out for this. And usually that happens in the spring. Sometimes it stays wet in the fall too. But we've struggled with this for so many years, like ever since Guidestone has been managing this farm, that there was actually, we brought in topsoil from elsewhere to kind of raise up an area of the farm that's about a ½ acre, and that's where we do the bulk of our production, outdoor production. So that part of the farm doesn't flood, but also has its own unique challenges, particularly with our fertility is a little wonky. So our soil tests this year revealed high levels of boron and iron, and like twice as much boron as we should have. And we're like on the verge of like potassium toxic for some reason, likely because of the over application of compost in the past. But yeah, it's sort of a mystery because we've kind of lost track of where that soil came from in the first place. And so now we just have to manage it. It's also really rocky. And so like, I was farming in New Jersey before. I feel like I tried to use a broad fork on this farm and like just hitting rocks, like it didn't work at all. We do use a BCS. We received a grant from the Specialty Crop Block Grant Program through Colorado Department of Agriculture to experiment with low-till methods. So we were able to get a BCS tractor, and we have a flail mower. Did some cover crop trials as part of that. Worked with silage tarps. You asked about cover crops specifically. We've had mixed results. Again, like you were saying, Josie, because of the irrigation issue. We've tried a couple of things before I came to the farm. We're trying some like barley, millet, field pea combination, irrigated with drip tape, and then mulched with wood. So again, like coming from the East Coast, I was like, wow, that's a really interesting way to do things. But that drip tape tip actually came from folks at Rocky Mountain Farmers Union, I think the convention or something. And it was, yeah, interesting. Our second kind of like summer cover crop trials, we did a mix of sorghum Sudan grass and buckwheat, and that was really successful. We were able to plant that in an area that like didn't have as much wind, so we were able to use an overhead system, and that turned out really nicely. Also because we had to use the silage tarps ahead of time, and so I think that really helped with establishment to make sure there was no competition. But the issue with the buckwheat we found was that we wanted to choose crops that would winter kill. But we also didn't want the buckwheat to become a weed. So I had to flail it before it would have winter killed. So it kind of cut its life short a little bit. Didn't get quite as much biomass as we were hoping. What else? We have a couple of high tunnels, one that's fixed and one that's movable on a track. One of those high tunnels is where the worst of the flooding happens. And so we've actually raised those beds up like in wooden boxes, like that kind of raised bed. Partly because of the educational work that we do at the farm with volunteers, and partly to avoid the subsurface irrigation. There's also some like really cool benefits of that subsurface irrigation if we can like figure out how to manage the water a little bit better. Like we have an orchard area. The farm just grows comfrey, like tons of comfrey. And we also have a grow dome. Again, kind of like for the educational benefit there. Also really helpful for the wind. We can grow in that much longer than we can grow in our high tunnels. But it comes with its own management challenges, particularly pest pressure.
So
I was going to talk about like compost, or should I wait to talk about compost?
I think this is a great transition into asking folks additionally, and Emma, just to name, gosh, you've got such an interesting growing site and challenging, and I mean, just having to deal with importing topsoil, and then, that happened years past, and not knowing the source, and then having soil tests indicate high levels of micronutrients, and it's like a puzzle. So good on you for doing the work you do. But yeah, I think this is a good transition point towards asking folks in addition to, and I asked the cover crop question to highlight for viewers who will be watching this in the future, hoping to glean some insight into growing in the West, that we in the West, and especially in Colorado, need to find other avenues for building soil organic matter and increasing soil ecology in general. And although the addition of compost comes with some of its own considerations, it is a great tactic to use in a pinch. And so Emma, would love to bounce over to you again and yeah, hear you talk about that. Oops, muted. No worries.
Oh, I'm muted. Sorry, Amy, to talk about which.
To talk about
me?
if you jump into, yeah, I can hear you now. How you're utilizing compost to build soil organic matter, or in general to foster soil ecology.
Yeah. Yes. So thanks. So as I mentioned, we had these funny soil test results come back, and were advised by the people at Paonia Samples, if you get them done at Logan Labs, which I highly recommend. I mean, I know you're at CSU, Amy, but they're like, I just felt like it was a little more like comprehensive and super helpful. They were able to like prescribe an amendment mix, specifically from our soil test results. They're like a little more expensive, but I think generally worth it. Anyway, so Bart at Paonia Soil Company said, take 2 years off of compost at least. And I was kind of bummed because, you know, I like compost. I like making it, using it. But we pivoted. A lot of growers in our area also use goat manure. We like have a pretty stable source of goat manure and other animal around here because there's so much ranching. So we pivoted and started experimenting with some compost teas, using like a compost base. Like a little while we had worm castings, and that was really helpful. And then the recipe I've been using has kelp meal and humic acid, and a couple of other things, fish hydrolysis with fish meal. And then the bubbler was adapted from, do y'all know Anne of all trades? She like builds farm things. We built her bubbler. To the production field, and hard to say, like just in one season, how effective that was. I think our plants looked pretty healthy, and especially like with our other low till, important in like a good way of improving our soil biology. We focused this year, have experimented with the Johnson Sioux bioreactor, which allegedly creates like a fungal dominant compost. It's primarily made with like wood, like not a ton of nitrogen, and then it is in a specific way. It's just like a long and cool process. And I think that method was developed out of New Mexico State. Is that right? So it's specifically for like growers in arid climates that might struggle with fungal diversity in soils. The issue there was the pile is not supposed to freeze, and we built it outside, so it froze. We may try in the future to high And then the other thing we did is we actually built compost, make compost in the winter. So we actually made compost in in the raised beds in our growing dome, because there's like heat and moisture in there. And that happened really quickly, our compost there. It had its own sort of like, issues with, I mentioned disease before, it kind of got some mildew. Yeah, those are the ways that most on the farm.
Emma, thank you for the overview of diverse applications. And I wanted to Jade, I know we have a little bit of time left. Jade, I know when we spoke earlier, you mentioned an appreciation for the more organoleptic or taste, touch, sight, smell, hearing approach to observing health. And just curious if you could share maybe some examples of how you've been monitoring things. And I know you said you're going to be pulling your first soil samples, I think, this year, but yeah, I would just love to hear a little snippet about that.
Yeah, I feel like, I don't know, I feel like I've listened to so many different soil scientists' opinions, like you don't have to rotate crops, or you have to use compost, or you need a more bacteria level, or you need a more fungal level soil. And I feel like so much of it is like based off of that specific soil scientist's experience, and like also where they're located. And then we try to take like all these really important things that they have to say and try to apply it to wherever we are located in our soils. And it doesn't always work, or it like throws off the balance too much. So I'm kind of a rebel. I have been avoiding doing a soil test for the last 4 years on the farm, because I really want to have a kind of, like you had mentioned, like kind of more of a hands-on approach of like really understanding why, from my own observations, why certain plants aren't growing well, or why the weeds are growing so heavily in one area versus another area. So I know I get.
Josie, as we are like zooming out or back a little bit, what's your approach in your management role of keeping your eyes on the prize of soil fertility? Do y'all, pull samples once a year, twice a year? Do you have a favorite lab that you send things to? And or what do you think new growers might benefit from hearing in your experience?
Well, I think we definitely have always taken soil tests, and we have a huge, kind of amazing Excel database of all of our soil tests in every field for the last 12 years, which feels like an accomplishment that it's all in one place. We can scroll through and we can watch and monitor changes. And we definitely also are a part of exactly what Jade was talking about, which are more the physical ways that you can determine if your soil is healthy. So we really made a huge commitment to soil health about 2.5 years ago. We hired a compost kind of production person who was going to focus on making small amounts of really, really good compost with vermicomposting and Johnson Sioux bioreactors and static aerated piles, and also like fungal, very slow, very just kind of like let the soil do its own thing off in this corner. And so we really employ all approaches. We look at the chemical tests, and we use Logan Labs, and we use Ward Labs for like a larger, you can do a Ward Labs test that tells you exactly what your fungal component and your bacterial component is, and how actively your soils look like they are digesting nutrients. And then you can also go with Logan Labs, which is like a very kind of streamlined, basic, this is what you're high in, this is what you're low in. They don't typically monitor nitrogen because you're always going to be low in nitrogen, and you're always adding nitrogen every year. So it's more on some of those smaller micronutrients and elements and things. And so we look at that and we say, okay, let's look at the soil test. Let's look at what the cation exchange capacity is for this field. And that really is just about like, how much do you think this field can digest and take in nutrients and make it available for the plants that we're growing, right? So you're looking at the crop, you're looking at what that exchange capacity could be, and then you're looking at the organic matter level. And you're saying that's one set of pieces of information that's going to tell us how to manage our soil. And then you're doing what Jade was talking about. So we have a set of 5 physical tests that we do to every field every year, and we record that and we look at that. And that's really like doing a worm count. So we take each square foot of the field, and we get a bunch of school kids to come out, and they fill buckets with worms. And we say, all right, there's this many worms in this square foot of our soil, of our field. And last year we put compost down from the Johnson Sioux bioreactors, and now we have 30 more worms in this square foot. And so we know that like that bioreactor is working and we have more worms. And then let's take our hands into the soil and feel it. And what does it feel like? Is it compacted? Is it running through our fingers? Is it balling up? Is it really, really tight? And then we can say, all right, let's pour some water through a subsection and see what the filtration rate is. And then let's see, how stable the soil is. So we'll take a selection of soil and we'll put it in a jar. And we'll see if there are a lot of aggregates and they stay together, or if the soil completely falls apart and it's just a bunch of silt and you can't even like see anything besides dirty water. That's going to tell you how strong and how connected your soil aggregates are. And so we just have a series of those tests that we collect every year. And then we have our soil test as well. And yes, we have to kind of balance those pieces of information so we're not going too far into one rabbit hole. Because you can spend all your time and money on amendments and nutrients and micro amending, and you can all of a sudden wind up with something that Emma was referencing, which is like toxic potassium or high phosphorus because you're adding too much compost. And of course, because your soil is a living system that needs to breathe and needs air, if you're dumping a ton of anything on it, it's going to have bad indigestion, right? And it's going to have too much potassium, or it's going to have too much phosphorus, and your plants are going to show some weird signs. Like we had really small beets that were not sizing up, and our whole beet crop, like succession after succession, was just like not happy and not healthy. And we couldn't figure out why. And we did see that we had really high phosphorus and really high potassium, and we were low in boron. And so those pieces of information did help us to solve a problem that otherwise we might not have known what to do. But that's not how we're managing the soil overall. That's taking the information that we've collected diligently and then applying it to a problem, and then being able to say, but our farm overall, we know that compost is a good thing. Don't let anyone tell you compost is not good, right? It's amazing stuff. It's like incredibly active biologically, and we need that in our soil. But maybe what we started doing is just saying, let's not buy these giant semis of compost coming from whatever kind of industrial place we can find and dumping it all over because that's the answer to every problem. Instead, we stopped using compost. We took some time off. We really analyzed like those physical properties of the aggregates and the texture and the filtration rates. And then we said, okay, when we're ready to apply compost, we're going to apply really, really good homemade, locally produced from our own farm compost in this one area. And we're going to let it sit, and we're going to use the heck out of wood chips and just kind of let it do its thing. And then maybe when we're ready, we're going to put some crops into it. And so I think, just like all things, if the soil is this living, breathing, active organism, and then you take something from like across the world or deep in the ocean or, wherever, and you dump a huge amount of it onto that living, breathing organism, it's going to be like, whoa, like I'm out of balance now, I'm out of whack. And like, also you're growing Mediterranean plants in me and you want them to be huge and healthy. So like, come on, give me a break. So we try to keep it local and keep it homegrown. And we try to really collect soil samples from around our property that we think are fungally rich. And we try to really foster that fungal relationship in the soil, because we know that that's what ultimately helps the plants intake nutrients the best to their roots. But also you need the bacteria, right? You need all of those other components as well. And so I think it really is just kind of for us, like not getting too deep into any one dogma, but really trying to like take into account that it's a living, breathing thing, and we just need to be as good as we can to it. And we need to use the skills that we have just as regular citizen farmers, not high level scientists. But also, yeah, I'm going to call the scientists sometimes, and I'm going to have them analyze my soil test sometimes. And I'm going to be mindful if someone's telling me something about my soil, are they benefiting from it? Are they trying to profit from that information they're telling me? Or are they truly just trying to help me understand, the rich and diverse and crazy confusing world of soil? So I think it's always good to take into account the scientists and into account the soil experts, but also know like you have to make a decision for your own farm that's going to really like suit your operation the best. And sometimes that's not spending all your money and time on trying to figure out what's going on underground, but it's just doing what you think feels good, like cover cropping, putting a tarp on it, keeping the moisture in there, not tilling too much, intercropping as much as you can, those kinds of things.
Josie, thank you so much. Those are such valuable takeaways for new growers who are watching and or listening to this. A lot of the things that Josie shared, I think, are really clear indicators of what compels us in the West to grow in a way that really nowhere else, at least in the contiguous United States, is compelled to, because of our wildly diverse soils, both chemical biology and physical structure, our weather, our temperatures, and our elevation gradients is just really wild, fun, challenging, and exciting. And thank you so much to Jade, Emma, and Josie for sharing about your particular unique experiences. For folks watching this, Emma, Jade, and Josie's information will be included in a PDF that is linked with this recording, along with any mentions of particular, for example, the Ward Lab, Logan Lab, the Johnson Sioux bioreactor. A lot of materials that folks mentioned will be included in a handout. And again, contact information if you'd like to get a hold of Jade, Emma, or Josie and reach out to find out more about their growing operation and who they are and what they're doing. This has been really, really educational for me. I'm so impressed and humbled, as always, by hearing what folks are doing and how they're doing it. So thank you so much, Josie, Emma, and Jade. And anyone who's watching this, there will be a third webinar with Dr. April Ullery at New Mexico State University. And April will dive into some of the things that we talked about today. So I hope everyone has a great day or night whenever you're watching this. Farm on. Thank you.
Thank you.